Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambattvam Anusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Namostu te Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullaravinda Yatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraikapanaye Jnanamudraya Krishnaya Gitamrita Duhe Namaha Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogdha Gopalanandanaha Partho Vatsya Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahata Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Amriteshwarye Namaha. Thank you all for joining us again tonight. We are in chapter 13 of the Bhagavad Gita. And in verses 25 and 26 last week, Krishna talked about the sadhanas for gaining what is called Atma Jnanam or self-knowledge. And those sadhanas were Karma Yoga, Upasana, which is a broader name for Bhakti Yoga, and Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana, the traditional method of studying the scriptures and meditating upon them. Then in verse 27, Krishna indirectly revealed the cause of samsara, of the repeated births and deaths, saying that it is from the association, quote-unquote, association, or what is called samyoga of kshetra and kshetrajna. Kshetra is the body for us, and kshetrajna is the consciousness. That is the translation of that for our microcosm. Fortunately, Shankaracharya helps us understand this statement by clarifying that the so-called association is not an actuality, but rather in the form of superimposition of each on the other. In other words, we project a consciousness on the body and we project death upon consciousness or the soul, neither of which is correct. And he says that this is a consequence of a lack of discernment between the real natures of the kshetra and the kshetrajna. So in other words, we don't understand what the real nature of this material body, nor our mind, nor our intellect, and how that is different from pure consciousness. We don't understand either one of those. That's why we mix them up completely. So this process of superimposition actually it's actually sort of delineating the two powers of Maya, the basic powers of Maya. That is avarana and vikshepa. Avarana just means veiling power. And then vikshepa is the projection or superimposition power. So the idea is that avarana, or that veiling power, is what keeps us from accessing the reality that we are actually the Atman, the Paramatman. So That's what ignorance is, that knowledge has been veiled. And no matter how much we pay somebody to teach us how to attain realization, ultimately the realization is just that I was already the self, I just didn't realize it. So that truth that should be self-evident, the fact that it is not, that is the veiling power of Maya. It is inscrutable, and there's no explanation for why it is there, because it is beyond the intellect. We cannot actually even talk about that much more, because we haven't gone beyond our intellects. And then that power of projection follows up immediately after we feel that inadequacy, that lacking, because we haven't realized ourselves, we haven't realized the truth that I am the Atman, the Paramatman, God, so to speak. And because of that, we feel incomplete. And because of that feeling of being incomplete, or what is called apurnatvam, we assume that that fullness is going to come from the world around us. And so then we project everything that we feel we're missing, we project that on the world around us. So that is the Vikshepa Shakti, or the projection power of Maya. And as so long as we remain ignorant of our true self, there can be no end to this. There can be no end to Maya for us, unfortunately. The only way is to completely uproot the tree of samsara. And the only way to do that is to burn its roots with the fire of self-knowledge. Until then, we will endlessly confuse the Atman and Maya, the consciousness and this body, the kshetrajna and the kshetram. And it is this confusion that we refer to as adhyasa, or superimposition, in the Vedantic philosophy. And sorting out this confusion is the purpose of this chapter. It is also the purpose of Amma coming to earth to help all of us. Because ultimately, if we want to realize God, and that's what she's trying to help us do, she has to guide us in how to sort out that confusion between matter and consciousness. And because that is the purpose of this chapter, it receives the title of Kshetra, Kshetrajna Vibhaga Yoga, which means the yoga of differentiating the Kshetra and the Kshetrajna, the matter and spirit. You could say it, spirit or the Atman. So in this process of differentiating these two, certainly Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga prepare the ground. They have a tremendous role, and they can lead us up to the threshold of self-knowledge, but they cannot remove ignorance. This is very clearly pointed out by the scriptures. I think when we look at Amma's way of teaching us, though, I feel that she would say that we can convert those sadhanas into a sadhana, a jnana sadhana, or a sadhana for knowledge. We can convert them. We don't have to stop selfless service. We don't have to stop singing bhajans and doing pujas and things. It is just our attitude towards them that needs to change. And then we will witness the actions we perform instead of identifying with them. And then there will be no longer any division between the devotee and the deity. Instead of doing more actions, more seva, instead of doing more pujas, singing more bhajans, we need to understand these sadhanas more deeply. All of us, myself included. Don't think I'm saying I'm exempt from that. And if we can understand these sadhanas better, a small action or a single bhajan may be enough if we have that right understanding and attitude. Just think, to glide into a profound meditation, we don't need to listen to dozens of Amma's bhajans, right? Even a single bhajan of Amma's can take us deep within because of her bhava. Amma's feeling, that is what matters, and that's what we feel. And that's why I and many other people were mesmerized by Amma's bhajans from day one. And that was what we did. We listened to the bhajans, not knowing anything else. We felt something eternal, something that was foreign but also very familiar. It's an uncanny feeling. And that feeling is her depth of existence. So those bhajans were awakening our yearning to know our true self. We just didn't realize that. And the deeper we go into Karma Yoga and Bhakti Yoga, which when you broaden the concept of Bhakti Yoga, we can call it Upasana, then the closer we get to Jnana, to self-knowledge. And ultimately, both Karma Yoga and Upasana merge into Jnana, into the path of knowledge. I think that's what Amma would say to us. But for that, it is imperative that we have a living Sadguru, not just any old guru, a realized master. And they should be living, and from them we have to receive what's called Gurupadesha, or the Guru's teachings. And preferably it should be direct, not some YouTube video or anything. You may be watching this in YouTube, but I'm not the guru, so what I'm saying is, Amma's teachings, you should really try to get from her directly as much as possible. And what is the fruit of that knowledge? Why are we putting so much emphasis on it? What changes will it bring about within us? That is exactly what we're going to hear about tonight, all the way up to verse 33. So let us begin that exploration of the benefits of this knowledge by chanting verse 31 together. You can follow after me. Repeat what I chant, please. Yada bhuta pratag bhavam ekastam anupashyati tata eva cha vistaram brahma sampadhyate tada. So for this verse, I don't have any edits. It's simply when he perceives the separate existence of all beings rooted in the One, and they're spreading forth from that One alone, he then becomes Brahman. So it was a little hard for me to edit this to non-gender specific because I wanted to use one, but then you've got he and one comes like too many times. So sometimes it's a little difficult to rectify the archaic English. As many of you know, I love to share quotes from the Jnaneshwari by the Saint Jnanadev. And here's a wonderful one. He says, "It is only then, when the diversity of forms of the beings are viewed as components of a grand totality, that the state of their having attained the supreme Brahman is experienced." So he's saying you are not realized unless you see all beings as one grand totality. It's easy to talk about it, but to do that is the real deal, according to him. Just as there are ripples in water, or atoms in the earth, or rays in the sun, or different organs in the body, or different sorts of feelings in the mind, different sparks in one fire, in that way, the diverse forms of the beings are of only one single soul. And when this is perceived through the vision of knowledge, then only the ship containing the wealth in the form of the Supreme Brahman comes into one's possession. So we say, waiting for my ship to come in, a boat to come in. What is the expression? In this case, there's no waiting. You have to acquire spiritual wisdom and knowledge. Then the ship with the wealth of knowledge will come to us. We won't have to go chasing after it. And he concludes by saying, then, wherever he casts his glance, he sees and discovers nothing else but the Supreme Brahman. In short, this brings him infinite bliss. So, forget about all the tasty food items. We say, oh, this cake is divine, or this is simply heavenly. Nothing compares with this bliss. Here, Krishna is telling us that realization means that we view all beings, everything, as components of a grand totality. And that grand totality is nothing other than the universal substratum, which we've been calling Brahman, Paramatman, etc. The word used here is adhishtanam, which means substratum. And that's all that really exists. It's not like there's multiple versions of that. There's only one reality, and what we know as Maya is its shadow. We showed that video about children getting afraid and crying, seeing their shadow. Well, that's all we're doing. We're afraid of Maya. We're so, petrified and worried and everything, and all of that amounts to being afraid of our own shadow. But that Maya, that shadow, so to speak, has two states. One is the manifest state, and one is the unmanifest state. When it is manifest, we call it Jagat, or this universe. And when it is in the unmanifest state, we call it Prakriti, or it has been called Mula Prakriti in the Gita also. It is the same universe in seed form during the pralaya time, or the time of dissolution, when there's no physical creation in existence. They're basically the same thing, matter, but one is manifest, one is in seed form. Potential matter, like we have kinetic energy and we have potential energy. This is kinetic matter versus potential matter. Think of it that way. And in chapter 8, verse 18, Krishna said something very similar. At the coming of day, all manifest beings proceed from the unmanifest, and at the coming of night, they merge again in the same, which I called the unmanifested. So this concept is common in all of the Vedantic texts that touch on creation. It goes from unmanifest to manifest and back to unmanifest. And that is that law of the universe, the physical universe, beginningless and endless. So we may say, when is it all going to be over? There is no putting a stop to that. It's just the way the universe is. But there's a way to get off of the merry-go-round, to jump off that never-ending cycle, and that is moksha, and that's what we're talking about here. For this cycle to exist, however, it needs a changeless substratum. Right? All these changes have to take place on top of something that's not changing. And that's what we're talking about, that changeless substratum we call the Brahman, Purusha, Atma, Paramatma, Kshetra, consciousness principle. All these names refer only to that. For Brahman, the substratum, there is no creation and dissolution. Just like there is no sunrise or sunset for the sun. Because the sun is the substratum for both of those. Just like there can be no sunrise or sunset without the sun, there can be no creation and dissolution without Brahman. It is existence. So, putting it simply, matter cannot exist independent of Brahman. It is dependent on that Brahman or the Purusha, which is me, which is you, which is everybody's essence. And that is why it says in the Kaivalya Upanishad, in me alone everything is born. In me everything rests. And in me everything is dissolved. I am that Brahman, the one without a second. So this means that in this tradition, we talked about this in the Sanatana Dharma 2 lectures that we had, 2 talks we had. Various sages have realized the ultimate reality, that they are one with Brahman. And they express their experience in various ways. All those realizations and expressions are put in the Vedas in the form of the Upanishads. That's what they're for, to realize, to reveal the oneness of the seeker and what he is seeking or she is seeking. And then in this verse, he says, the separate existence of all beings rooted in the one. We need to understand what he means by this. This is what a realized being sees. All beings are supported by that one entity, Brahman. That includes even the subtle beings like devas, lower beings, human beings, of course. all the animals, amoebas, everything, and all these things we cannot see, not just because they're too small to see, but because they're in different planes of existence. There's considered to be 14 worlds. All these beings, however we want to refer to them, are all depending on Brahman for their existence, because Brahman is existence, right? So they're all supported in that non-dual Brahman. And then he says, and they're spreading forth from that one alone. This is what a realized being sees. This is what a realized being actually sees, perceives. So the idea is that we should understand that this spreading, so-called spreading, is not a reality. It seems to be spreading, but there's only one. It's that Brahman, which is the substratum. Everything else is an illusion. It's a seeming creation. In an illusory sense, all these beings have come into existence from that Brahman alone. Just like if there are lots of lights behind you, you will have multiple shadows, right? So it is not that there's multiple lights, but there's multiple expressions, reflections of that light. So we think there are all these different living beings, different consciousnesses, but there's only one, and it's just like a lamp shining through different holes in a lantern. That's all it is. Here Shankaracharya adds this to help us understand, and we're always grateful for that. He realizes that origination in such diverse ways as, then he quotes from the Chandogya Upanishad, the vital force is from the self, hope is from the self, memory is from the self, space is from the self, fire is from the self, water is from the self, coming into being and withdrawal are owing to the self, and so many other examples. The idea is that the source and the substratum of all is the Atma. And this word perceive is actually a very important word too. And Shankaracharya clarifies what he means by that, what Krishna means by that. He says, one realizes having reflected in accordance with the scriptures and acharyas. Acharyas means competent teachers. And in our case, it's Amma, nobody else. The rest of us are just helping, that's all. So it means that we don't have to go out and come up with our own version of truth. We can interpret it and understand it in various ways. We can, view that one truth from any standpoint we want. But there's only one truth, and the rishis realized that who knows how many eons ago, and they've recorded their experiences. All we need to do is understand what they're saying. We can get help from Amma, we can get help from other scriptures and whatnot. But that truth, we need not come up with our own theory. Most likely we will be confused because we don't have enough inner clarity, which means we don't have enough inner purity. We're full of likes and dislikes. I'll give you an example in a little while when I tell you about, when we talk about space. So we don't need to, and we probably should not try to come up with our own theories. Rely on the wisdom of the rishis, and more than anything, the modern day rishi who is Amma. And what happens when we recognize Brahman as revealed by Amma and the scriptures? He concludes the verse by saying, he then, or she then, becomes Brahman. Becomes Brahman. Wow, that is a very important promise. And Shankaracharya quotes the Chandogya Upanishad again here, saying, all this is but the self. That will be our experience. And that is why the Mundaka Upanishad says, Brahmavit Brahmeva Bhavati, a very well-known quote. Brahmavit Brahmeva Bhavati. It means the knower of Brahman becomes that Brahman. Now, some of you may be thinking, what is this becoming? Because we're supposed to be, then how do you become something that you already are? That's a contradiction. You're right. So that verb become cannot be interpreted literally here. But from our standpoint, it feels like a becoming because, We don't wake up feeling like, today I'm Brahman, It's always this thing, how am I going to realize God? So it's not, until it's an experience, we can think of it as becoming. But really, there is no question of becoming Brahman. It just means that we recognize our oneness with Brahman. And a really good analogy here is the waking state versus the sleeping state, the dream state. The dreamer recognizes the one who is awake, right? He has to, or she has to. But who is the waker for that person who is sleeping, who is seeing a dream? That waker is the creator, sustainer, and dissolver of the dream state. It's only us, nobody else. The waker creates the dream world, sustains it, and then finally dissolves it back into himself or herself. So how does such a dreamer know such a waker? We can travel all over the world, all over the dream world, and we will never meet the one who is awake because we are still dreaming. There's only one way: we have to wake up. That's the physical dream analogy. Because when the dreamer wakes, then we have to ask ourselves, how does that dreamer meet the waker, the one who is awakened? There's no question of meeting the waker because the waker is me. We know that I am the waker. I am the awakened one. That's the only way this realization can take place, because there's no difference between me and the awakened me. So we have to wake up in order to know Brahman. And when we wake up to know Brahman, we discover that I need not realize Brahman. I am Brahman. I've always been Brahman. And that is what is meant here in reality when he says he becomes Brahman. Now, Jnanadev leads into the next verse with the following commentary. Actually, it's not commentary. He almost always speaks in the first person as Krishna himself. He's adding and filling in between the lines. Only a great being could do such a thing. And this is what he has to say. In this way, the entire topic of Prakriti and Purusha, Prakriti and Purusha refers to Maya and consciousness, has been explained to you through a vivid description of its workings in each and every branch. You should consider it an achievement of as much concern and importance as you would the acquisition of a mouthful of nectar or the discovery of a hidden treasure. Now I have a few words of profound import for you, but before you hear them, you must surrender to me your mind in its entirety. The Lord said this, and then started his discourse, which Arjuna heard with perfect concentration. Perfect concentration. Do we have perfect concentration? Maybe if I was Krishna or if I was Amma, maybe I would have your perfect concentration. But this is the problem. We haven't hit rock bottom. At least most people haven't hit rock bottom. Arjuna had hit rock bottom. He was ready to just kill himself practically, right? Right then and there, he was going to run away and go to the Himalayas and hide in a cave. But he had the clarity, thankfully, for him and for all of us, that he surrendered to Krishna. And he did that in verse 7 of chapter 2, saying, "Please tell me decisively what is best for me. I'm your disciple. Teach me, for I have taken refuge in you." So when we take refuge in Amma wholeheartedly, just like, I have nobody else, Amma. Without you, I will just die. Then she will have our full attention, and maybe she will also give us that supreme teaching like Arjuna got from Lord Krishna. For now, we can hear what Krishna says in the next verse. We'll chant verse 32. Anaditvan nirgunatvad paramatmayam avyayaha sharira sthopi kaunteya nakaroti nalipyate. Arjuna, being without beginning and devoid of gunas, meaning attributes, this Supreme Self, the Paramatma, imperishable, though situated in the body, neither acts nor is affected or tainted. So, being without beginning and devoid of gunas, attributes, the Paramatman, imperishable, though situated in the body, neither acts nor is it tainted or affected. So, this verse is a preemptive response to those who might ask, after hearing the last verse, but if the self is in all the bodies, then won't it be affected by the defects of the body? The body's doing actions, it's accumulating karma. Won't the self also get karma as a result, and so on? So Krishna has to talk a little bit more about the nature of Brahman. He has to explain that it does not incur, it doesn't do anything, and it does not incur any karma as a result. And remember, Brahman is the same thing as Purusha, Kshatrajna, Jnayam, Paramatma, all of which refer to Chaitanyam, or consciousness. I'm just saying these things over and over and over again because the Gita uses lots of different terminology, but some of them just mean the exact same thing. So we have to have a list of, this is what he's talking about, And then, except in a few places, he uses words in a different meaning, and we will always point that out, don't worry. So in order to make a very powerful point here, Jnanadev paints a very unsavory picture of the body. He loves those graphic kind of explanations. And so he's trying to show how ridiculous it would be to mix the body with Brahman. So here it is. It's a little bit long, but it's fun to hear it's enlightening and sometimes, light-hearted also. The body is formed of the 5 gross elements and is tied with the rope or thread in the form of actions of the previous and present lives. And it is ever revolving on the wheel of birth and death. The body is like a small lump of butter placed in the mouth of the fire in the form of time, where it is consumed in an instant, in as much time that it takes a fly to flap its wings. Who thinks of such examples, right? You ever looked at how long it takes a fly to flap its wings? You can't even see it, it's so fast. If this body falls into fire, it will be reduced to ashes. If it gets into the jaws of a dog, it will be transformed into dung. Escaping both of these fates, it will get reduced to a cluster of germs and insects. In short, whatever end it may meet with would be quite repulsive. Such is the condition of the body. The Atman, however, is such that being beginningless, it is eternal and self-same. It is neither possessed of quality nor qualityless. It is neither lean nor fat. It is neither empty nor full, neither alone nor in company, neither with form nor without form. Remember in the Lalita Sahasranamam, it says that Devi is both with and without form. I cannot read everything, it's going to take too much time. I'll just read a few more examples that he gives. He says, the Atma is neither created along with the universe, nor is it exhausted with the end of the world. The day and the night rotate in the sky, and in that way, bodies come and go under the supremacy of the Atman. Therefore, even while abiding in the body, it neither acts nor causes anyone to act, nor does it take upon itself the responsibility of any actions, in other words, the karma. So he has basically ruled out all possibility of that. And then the verse says, this Paramatma imperishable. So that word imperishable needs to be explained a little bit. It comes from the Sanskrit word avyaya, which literally means that which cannot be depleted. So the idea is that it is indestructible, unlike the body. The body grows old, it loses its strength, not just strength, teeth, hair, everything, memory, and ultimately merges back into earth. Every atom in this body will eventually merge back into Maya in the form of, if we're cremated, maybe some smoke or something like that, otherwise ashes. So, it is only natural that it meets with such an ending, because everything that has a beginning must have an end. The body came from Prakriti, from nature. It goes back to nature. There's no other way. So then how can we say that Brahman is exempt from this seeming rule? Well, it's not exempt, but it's not created either. And because it is not created, it has no beginning and no ending. Why not? Like we said before, because it is existence, and by definition, existence cannot have a beginning or end. In the Vedantic philosophy, existence is, here we're using the word sat. If we want to say it properly, we have to call that sat. Sat is what never changes in the past, present, and future. Asti is existence of a lower form, like a baby's born, like Fred exists now, then Fred doesn't exist anymore, he died, that kind of thing. That is astitvam. It's not, it's used in a more of a dualistic way. But sat, there's no debate about that. It is only it is only the permanent existence. And devoid of gunas, attributes, Shankaracharya says here, it is only something possessing qualities that perishes, owing to the loss of its qualities. But this one, being without qualities, does not perish. So let's take the example of fabric. Even I am realizing this was new fabric about a year or so ago, and it was really bright in color. Now the color's fading, and it's not as clean as it was a year and a few months ago. So the fabric, it starts off clean and bright, but then it fades, stretches, it may even develop tears somewhere. When the fabric is torn, we can call it like a substance destruction. And when its properties fade, we can call it destruction or disruption of the attributes or properties. And everything in Maya has both of these. Either its substance gets destroyed or some of the qualities get destroyed. Like even though the body's not destroyed, as we get older, the qualities of the body change. Even when you're a baby, you grow. That's an example of your attributes changing. So we have this, everything in Maya is like that. What about Brahman? What about consciousness? Think about it as consciousness. It is formless. So how are you going to damage or tear, cut, damage consciousness? There's no way, because it has no form. And there are no qualities either. So Brahman has no attributes, so there is no question of them deteriorating. So we can say that Brahman, or the consciousness, has neither type of this destruction. That's why they're calling it that. In the English translation, it was imperishable. And then he says, those situated in the body, it neither acts nor is affected. Shankaracharya, again, provides us with a little help here, saying that expression situated, that is, since the perception of the self occurs in the body, it is said to be situated in the body. So that subtle body, we've talked about it many times here, it reflects the consciousness. Therefore, we see it as though the consciousness is in this body or your dog's body or a bird's body or something like that. But this is called the chitabhasa. We've used that word many times. It's the reflection of chit or consciousness. And that is how we perceive Brahman, because it's the only manifest version of it. But it also doesn't perform any action. The jiva will always, that's another word for this, chitabhasa, reflection of consciousness. It always reflects that consciousness, whether it has a body or not. Because death is simply the subtle body peeling off of the physical body. So that subtle body is still reflecting, but we can't see it. Because we need to see it through the physical body. So this is the difference. It will always reflect consciousness, whether it has a physical body or not, but the difference is that most human beings, maybe some people can see these subtle beings, whatever it is, but most people cannot perceive the subtle body without a physical body. And the inert body also remains the same always too. It has different qualities, gunas, that are always interacting with the gunas in the inert matter around them. And whether the subtle body is there or not. When I'm reflecting consciousness in this body, it may be eating food and then moving and drinking or talking and interacting with people. That's what a living being does. But when the subtle body leaves, the body still continues to interact with the atoms and all the properties around it, except what's happening at that time, we call it a dead body. It's the destruction and decomposition that is taking place. So, still interacting with the gunas around it, but in a different way. It's returning the 5 elements to their original place. So, in both cases, the presence or absence of one or the other does not affect the other, right? So the absence of the body doesn't affect the consciousness, it's still consciousness. And the body behavior of the inert matter doesn't change just because the consciousness comes. The gunas are going to be interacting with the gunas, whether there's a subtle body there or not. How it does it is different, yes. A dead body is not going to start talking. But, or at least not as far as I know. But the point is that it's still the gunas interacting with the gunas. That's all the body can do. And it's certainly not the consciousness that's doing these things because it doesn't have a form. So you get the idea, right? It's just a matter of whether we can perceive that it is the same always, which we can't, unfortunately, because our faculties are limited. But really, when I was reading this verse, I was remembering it as like a high school chemistry experiment. You have, let's say you're making soap or you're mixing baking soda and vinegar. That's the easiest one that everybody knows. Suddenly you have this big explosion, right? You're not doing anything. And it's not like the baking soda and vinegar, or if you're making soap, it will be like oil and sodium hydroxide and water and things like that. These things are not sentient, right? They're inert. They're just matter. You put them in a jar or something and they start interacting with each other, right? I'm not doing anything. They're just doing it. They're doing it on their own because they have these qualities, and those qualities interact with each other on their own. What am I doing? I'm just watching. I'm just watching it happen. I'm the witness. So the chemicals interact with the chemicals. I'm watching. The gunas interact with the gunas. We're all just watching that in reality. We think we're doing it. That's the problem. So therefore, realizing I am the Paramatma is the same thing as discovering we are not the doer. We are not the one doing anything. We are the one witnessing it. And with that realization, it means that we're free from karma also. That itself should give us motivation to really apply ourselves to this and understand it and practice it as a sadhana. Now, Shankaracharya, I've told you, sometimes argues with himself, which is also kind of entertaining. And here he has an argument with himself. Really, he's just playing the devil's advocate towards his own theories to preemptively, refute them. So he's assuming the position of a seemingly very frustrated opponent. So exasperated, this person hypothetically says, then who is it that acts in the body and becomes affected? If there is some embodied being other than the Paramatma who acts and becomes affected, then why did you say earlier that the Kshatrajna and God are one? And if there's no embodied being other than God, then you should clarify who that is. Otherwise, we assume that there is none. And the philosophy of the Upanishads is too difficult to understand and has thus been abandoned by the Vaisheshikas, the Sankhyas, Jainas, and Buddhists. So this means in Shankaracharya's time, it was known that these, especially Jainas, the Jaina religion, and the Buddhists, at one point they did use the Upanishads, but they rejected them later just because it didn't match their philosophy, I guess we could say. And Shankaracharya also responds to that question by quoting Gita verse 5, chapter 5, verse 14. Simply saying, it is nature that acts, just like our chemistry experiment. And then he adds his own commentary saying, indeed, Prakriti or nature, which is nothing but ignorance, because, right, it's not actually happening, it's an illusory process, acts and becomes affected. In this way, empirical dealing becomes possible, but in reality, it does not occur in the one Paramatman. So when I say, there's Fred, I'm not Fred, empirically I can say, okay, Fred's going home to his house, I'm going home to my house. But in the Paramatman, there's no difference between us. That's the point. And another way we can think of it is when the surface of the sea, even if the surface of the sea is full of activity, in the ocean depths, it is perfectly still and peaceful. It's still just one ocean. And it has waves on the surface, perhaps, but at the base, the depths of the ocean is completely still and peaceful. Like that, the body of the jnani, the knower of truth, may be active, like Amma. She's doing so many things. You can hear in the morning live stream, she's saying, I called 100 countries to find these oxygen concentrators. She's so concerned for her children around the world, especially in India right now. That's where they have the shortage. So she's very active, but inside, she is actionless and perfectly peaceful. That's what we should understand. Now let us move on and chant verse 33. Yata sarvagatam saukshmyad akasham nopalipyate sarvatravastito dehe. Tatatma nopalibhyate as the all-pervading space or akasha is not tainted because of its subtlety, so too the self, existent everywhere, is not tainted, though dwelling in the body. Just change, a little bit of a change of the location of the words. So here he's using that beautiful analogy of space. This analogy is so helpful in understanding how the Paramatman is present everywhere in everything but not affected by it. And of course, if you think of space, it's so clear. Space exists everywhere, but does it ever get dirty by some place that is that lacks cleanliness? Let's say we're having a mud fight, little children playing in the mud, throwing mud at each other. Yes, space is there, but does the space get dirty also? No. So the Atman, like this, too abides in all beings everywhere, but it never gets blemished in any way due to that so-called association. This concept, like I said, is going to be repeated over and over again, so we can remember the clear demarcation of the Kshatrajna, the knower, and the Kshetra, the field, the world, Maya, this body. Space is the subtlest element, right? We have earth, water, fire, air, and space. I could go through how, the 5 elements become subtler, and with the subtlety means the previous elements cannot affect it. And since space is the most subtle of all of them, it is not affected by the other 4 elements. That's the point, without going into the details. But for those other 4 elements to exist, they need space. Don't we need space? Our body is made out of earth, which is basically food. Water, it's 60 to 70% water, right? And then fire. Fire in this case is just the heat element. So we have to have a certain heat to keep this body alive, otherwise we die. And then air, of course, we know we need air. So all these things, we need them, but more than anything else, we need space. If there's no space, this body cannot exist. So everything in this universe needs space. But there is something subtler than that space, and that is the Atman. It is even more subtle than space, and it is also tainted by nothing. But for us to conceive the Atman is a little difficult, whereas space we can kind of wrap our heads around a little more easily. So the implication of this verse has been interpreted to mean that the Paramatman is completely unattached and unaffected. And without making that point clear, the Gita would invite doubts about the consistency of its teachings. Someone might say it's everywhere, but it's not affected. How can that be? That's like me saying, I'm with all the COVID patients that are, COVID positive, but I'm not getting infected. It sounds impossible. Though Krishna doesn't explain this point in detail, we should understand it a little bit more. Remember, first of all, the Paramatma cannot be away from anyone or anything because it is all-pervading. Not just in the sense of consciousness, but in the sense of existence. These are the two that we really can identify with because we know that we're a conscious being. So that consciousness must exist in some way. And we feel I all day long. I'm existing. So my existence, where does that come from? So in these 2 cases, Chit and Sat, we can recognize that there is some being, and we're calling that the Paramatma. And it's not just me, it's everything. Here in the pond, we have all these geese fighting over who gets to live on this one little island that we have there. And every day the geese come there and they all fight it out. It really makes me feel bad. But even the goose thinks I. And the goose that's defending that one little island there, this is my island. So the goose also feels I and mine. But that I and mine is no different from mine or yours. That feeling of I and mine, is actually the mine part we can do without, but the I is that existence factor. So we have to recognize that, and the fact that it is everywhere. And Sat, if we are to live in this world, how can we deny existence? It's a ridiculous proposition. So the Paramatma accommodates everything within itself, yet it is never tainted, never affected by or sullied by anything, just like space. We call it the indweller or the antaryami, not because it actually dwells in a specific place, but because it dwells everywhere. It is the indweller of all beings, and there's only one. So this is that immanent nature we discussed a few classes ago. Not imminent or eminent, immanent, which means it spreads throughout. That's the principle that we talked about before. It is the one Paramatman that everybody identifies with unknowingly when they say I. And this should clarify that the Paramatman is not like, say, a man wearing a costume or a wetsuit or something like that. It is like space, all pervasive and untouched. Secondly, due to its subtlety, it is not affected by anything, again, just like space. This is the transcendental nature that we learned about in another class a few weeks back. So the Paramatma is both. These are terms that are used in the Christian tradition too, I believe, immanent and transcendental. Some say that God is, immanent. Some they say that it's transcendental, and some say that He's both. God is both, and we would say that the Paramatman is both. It's all pervasive and at the same time transcendental. It seems like a contradiction, but it's not. So space is the best analogy for now, and it isn't such a good analogy that a long time ago, in 1996, I had a very long and heated argument with a devotee who was temporarily convinced that the Atman, the self, was simply space itself, nothing else. At the time, the reason why that argument went on for so long is because I didn't understand this point, which is that at the dissolution of the universe, space is gone, at least in the way that we know it. But the Atman still exists. So we cannot say that the Atman and space are the same thing. And space is not conscious. The Atman can see space, can witness space, but space cannot witness the Atman because it's not conscious. So the space is also inert. So it's so subtle, space is so subtle that we miss the fact that it's everywhere. We'll say, I'll use this space, or you can have that space. If someone says, where is space? We should never ask that question, right? The answer would be, where is space not? Space is everywhere. So there's a classic Amma story that fits this context. I'd love to share it with you now. It was back in late February 1984. Ask yourself, where were you at that time? I was in high school. And I snuck out to go to Amrita Puri. No, I didn't meet Amma until later. But at that time, late February 1984, a devotee came to visit Amma. And seeing him approach, Amma smiled brightly and said to everybody there, here comes the novelist. Because this person used to ask a lot of questions. Everybody laughed. Then she turned to him and said, son, you will give a speech today. And the devotee replied, Amma, don't ask me to speak, please. I have that vasana, I have that tendency to show off as if I am great, if I speak. And Amma said, son, if you are Kali's son, Amma will make you speak today. Showing off will not happen if you speak in Amma's presence. And the man dismissed Amma's comment by saying, Amma's just saying that. This is how Amma plays tricks on everybody. Then Amma said in a very stern tone, no, it will not happen in that way. You will not feel egoistic if you speak, having been told by Amma. Then he tried to wiggle out of it again. And he said, anyhow, I don't feel like speaking. Who can say such a thing to Amma? What that means is that 37 years ago, people felt a little more free talking with Amma, right? Because there might have been just a handful of people there. But Amma knew it was just a bluff, so she pushed. And she said, you know, you speak daily, he's a professor, and you speak daily in the college, don't you? And the man didn't have any reply. But in his mind, he was thinking, that's how I earn my livelihood. And, you know, I cannot speak in Amma's presence. So Amma right then smiled mischievously. And with a mysterious look on her face, she looked up towards the sky and she said, if so, where is the place where mother is not? Just like, where is the place where space is not? She said, where is the place where Amma is not? The professor realized his mistake and fell at Amma's feet, and he said, unconditional surrender is the only way in Amma's presence. She is omniscient and omnipresent. And for the rest of the day, it is said that the words, which is the place where mother is not, where Amma is not, these words were echoing in the atmosphere the whole day and all the way up into the year 2021, because I'm repeating them to you. So it is true that the Paramatma is everywhere. Amma is that Paramatma. It's in everything, just like space. Both are present in the saint and in the sinner, in all types of body, all types of bodies, but never involved, never tainted. The purity of the heart of the saint does not increase the profundity of the glory of the Paramatman. Amma is the Paramatman. You know, if some great seeker comes, does it make the Paramatman any better? No. Neither does the impurity in the heart of the wicked diminish or tarnish the Paramatman. The role of space is simply to offer space. The role of Paramatma is simply Chit and Sat. And someday we'll realize it's also Ananda. We haven't reached that yet. It doesn't do anything or go anywhere. It simply is. Space simply is. The Paramatman simply is. So that means that if someone robs a bank, just like space is simply there, not participating, the consciousness and existence aspects of the Paramatma are simply there. It cannot go anywhere. Where is the Paramatman to go? It is the only one thing that exists. It cannot go anywhere. So at the same time, neither space nor the Paramatman are affected by what happens there. So this is what is meant by unaffected in this verse. So, like I said, space is an ideal metaphor because there's only one space, Akasha, and there's only one Atman. Both are formless, all-pervasive, and unaffected. The main difference is that, like I said, space is inert and the Atma is sentient. The Atma knows space, but space does not know anything. And the other difference is that space comes into being during the creation and is dissolved during the pralaya, the dissolution. Now we will read the final verse for today, verse 34. Yata prakashatya, yata prakashayatyekaha. One more time. This has to be chanted together. You cannot break it up. Yata prakashayatyekaha. Yata prakashayatyekaha. Kritsnam lokam imam ravihi. Kshetram kshetri. Tata kritsnam prakashayati Bharata. As the one sun illumines all this world, so does the Lord. So does the Lord of the Kshetra. And then our text from the ashram says, he who abides in the Kshetra. You can take it either way. O Arjuna, illumines the whole Kshetra. I'll read out all that together so it's not so cut up. As the one sun illumines all this world, so does the Lord of the Kshetra, O Arjuna, illumine the whole Kshetra. Okay? So it's a reference to the sun. Before he was using the space as an analogy, now he's using the sun as an analogy. In this time, in the sense of illumination, of course. So Jnanadev has a nice commentary here, I'll share with you. Iron is sent into motion by the contact of a magnet, yet iron is not magnetic. Similar is the relationship between the body and the soul. The domestic duties are all performed in the house with the help of the light shed by the lamp. Yet there is an immeasurable difference between the lamp and the house. It's a beautiful analogy for us. Although fire dwells in a latent form in the wood is not fire. And the soul should be viewed from this standpoint. The Atma should be viewed from this standpoint. The same difference that exists between the sky and the clouds, or between the sun and the mirage, exists between the body and the soul as can be perceived. In short, just as the sun in the sky illuminates different spheres in the universe, so does the field knower, the kshetrajna, the consciousness, illumine the entire seeming field. Raise no further doubt about it. So in some ways, his commentary is easier to understand than Krishna's words, because it's a little cryptic when Krishna says it. So, in the previous verse, we had the all-accommodating nature of Paramatma indicated through space, because space accommodates everything, just like the Paramatma. In this verse, he's doing the same thing, focusing on the illuminating nature of the Paramatma. Space cannot illumine anything, right? So, but the Paramatma can both be everywhere and illumine everything. He can accommodate everything as well as illuminate everything. So that is why we need two analogies. And these are the best examples for, or analogies for the Atma or the Paramatma, space and sunlight. Whenever you get confused or whenever you're trying to explain to somebody, revert to space and sunlight. They are the best examples. And sunlight also pervades all objects with its it pervades all objects with its rays, not just illuminating, the sentient beings, all things on this planet, in the whole universe. From our standpoint, don't forget, we know it's a solar system, but from our standpoint, it's the sun that's illuminating everything. So while the sunlight falls equally on all things, their merits and demerits don't affect the sun in any matter. So like, let's say the sun's rays fall on a person who has done many bad things, and then it falls on a saint, falls on Amma. So does the sun benefit one way or another? No, it doesn't get affected by it, and it's also not participating in any of the things that we do here. And he says, as the one sun illumines all this world. So it is the one sun, right? It is one source of all of this illumination. It may be illuminating many, but the illuminator is one. So similar, all beings, great and small, high and low, get their consciousness from the same source. That consciousness we see in a baby is the same as we see in Mr. Universe or a 99-year-old person. It's all the same consciousness. There's no better or worse. And the one sunlight illumines the whole creation, pervades the whole creation, and at the same time remains untainted by anything that takes place in creation. So in Kathopanishad, it is explained like this: as the sun, which helps all eyes to see, is not affected by the blemishes of the eyes or of the external things revealed by it, so also the one Atma dwelling in all beings is never contaminated by the misery of the world being outside of it. A beautiful quote. We need these quotes to help us deepen our understanding of what Krishna is talking about. That was, so you might want to refer to that, Kathopanishad 2.2.11. So that's a good one to go over. And actually the Upanishadic verses, you read them and then meditating on them is really a beautiful experience. And then Krishna continues to say, so does the Lord of the Kshetra. Here he doesn't use the word kshetrajna. We had this word, the knower of the field, kshetrajna. Here he calls it kshetri, which just means the Lord. Same thing, just a different name. As though we didn't have enough names and as though we weren't confused enough already. He adds one more there. So it's a test for us to see oneness in multiple names and form and concepts. So does the Lord of the Kshetra illumine the whole Kshetra. So in other words, consciousness is the Lord of this, the knower of this Maya. So consciousness illumines the entire Maya. So when the scientists come up with a more powerful telescope and they can now see more something somewhere even farther away than they ever saw before, it's still the consciousness that is illuminating that star or quasar, whatever it is, trillions of light years away. There's only one light illuminating it. They might say it's a star from somewhere else that's illuminating. No. It's the real illumination is coming from consciousness. Shankaracharya says here that the Kshetra refers to what Krishna said in verses 6 and 7 of this same chapter. Krishna was describing the Kshetra and its various modifications. He called, I'll just say it very quickly, you can refer back to yourself on your own. The 5 great elements, egoism, intellect, the unmanifested nature, 10 senses, the mind, 5 objects of senses, desire, aversion, pleasure, all these things. Everything that we identify with and think it has something to do with our individuality, it's all Maya, basically. That's what he's saying. Even your intellect, things like fortitude and so on, all these things are Maya. They're not permanent. And they are certainly not the consciousness. And then he says, the illustration of the sun serves to highlight 2 aspects of the self. Like the sun, the self is one in all bodies. And number 2, it remains unaffected by anything that happens on the earth. So he very kindly and compassionately helps us understand these more difficult verses. And so the Kshetram, this Maya, consists of so much plurality, multiplicity, whereas there's only one consciousness. So thus, one consciousness illumines all of this multiplicity. And the Kshetrajna, that illuminator, is never affected by anything that takes place on this planet. But since we see so many bodies, we falsely think that there are many consciousnesses. We're coming up with a fake word, but what else can we say? Otherwise, we would say kshetras. If I say kshetras, will you understand I'm talking about multiple consciousnesses? I don't know. So that's what we see. That's what our experience is, unfortunately. So it's like there's so many pots, and this pot space is one, this is pot space number 2, pot space number 3. You know, we think it's like that, but in reality there's only one space. So not infinite spaces. So that is why space is a very helpful analogy. We can refer to that and say, no, there's only one space in each of the pots. It's just seems like there's a separate space there. Similarly, there's only one consciousness, only one self, and the bodies are the pots that make it seem like there are multiple consciousnesses or multiple reflections, manifestations of consciousness. Now, we get to hear the summary of this teaching in verse 35. And we will also hear a review of the entire chapter and hopefully an introduction to the next chapter next week. So please join us then as well. For now, I have a few questions to answer, and then we will have a meditation. For once, we're ending on time. Recently, we haven't been able to do that. So, here's a question that I could not answer last week. Thank you for shedding... Oh, I'm not going to say any of that thank you stuff here. Maybe I said this. I'm not quite sure. In case I didn't say it, I'm going to say it again. This person was saying that, she was worried, I think it's a woman here, saying that if we have a lack of awareness, Amma does tapas on our behalf. I did say this, and the answer is yes, it's true. The mistakes of the disciples are compensated for by the guru, and because she has assumed responsibility for her children. So that was we already responded to. Excuse me, changing locations here. Today, live stream, when Amma sang Amme Bhagavati, there was a reference in the lyrics to 10 kinds of wealth. What does it mean? I can't remember the exact names of all the types of wealth. There's an Ashta Lakshmi, but it's not really so important what those forms of wealth are, because Devi's ultimate aim is to give us an expansive mind. And that expansive mind enables us to broaden our definition of wealth. Initially, we can only understand the materialistic definition of wealth. But the more we worship Devi, or Amma we can say, the more she can expand our understanding of wealth. In truth, all virtuous qualities are a form of wealth. And this is what Amma is trying to get us to appreciate. The physical, material wealth, it doesn't really change anything in our life, ultimately. Beyond a certain point, of course, poverty is one thing. But even, they have done research studies, and they've found that at this many dollars, at $70,000 or something like that, at least in America, beyond that, it doesn't help you become happier at all. Whatever the number is, it shows that beyond a certain point of stability, money doesn't help you. So that wealth doesn't increase your happiness level, but when we have those virtuous qualities in our heart, we're definitely going to be happier, because they are the key to advancing spiritually, as we've seen in this chapter itself. And if you want to know more about those, how we can see virtuous qualities as a kind of wealth, you can refer to chapter 16 of the Bhagavad Gita. You can have a sneak preview of your own, and you'll see what I mean. And so it doesn't have to be 10 types of wealth. It could be 10,000 types of wealth. And that would still be the truth, because virtues are the real wealth in life. So the next question was, what to do when vasanas that I have tried hard to overcome are rising again? Well, wouldn't you know it, right? Sounds like something is happening to everybody on the planet. Except for Amma and any God-realized being. really, we all have to deal with this. And it's not just this time around. So don't feel guilty. I think we might have gone through this hundreds, thousands of times. And so it's probably not the first time that we're thinking this or saying that to ourselves, why is this happening to me over and over? Consider yourself to be a sculptor, hewing a huge boulder into the shape that you envision. So each day you come and you chip at it a few times, it's a huge boulder, right? And it's like you're making Mount Rushmore or something, a little more divine than that perhaps. And you have a vision of what you want to be, basically everything that Amma says we should be. But it's not easy work. And we may only be able to complete a tiny bit every day. And sometimes we may feel like we're going backwards, but Amma says, no, you're not. Because when you're with the Guru, you're not going to go backwards. It just feels like that. And there may be no noticeable progress at all. But remember, Amma is not evaluating us by quantity, but by our sincerity. And that is the most important aspect. Try to strengthen your mind and willpower through sadhana and tapas, some kind of austerity. Just try. Do something very small that you can actually complete. Don't be too hard on yourself. Don't try to fast for a week and be in silence for a week and this and that. No. Just something that you can do. And you slowly build up your self-confidence and then move on and slowly increase it. What you cannot achieve through your sadhana and tapas efforts, pray to Amma for her help. That is the best thing. Surrender to her. In fact, feeling helpless is very helpful at times. It sounds contradictory, but it's helpful in surrendering. So having that feeling that, Amma, I can't do it. You have to do it. You have to help me. You have to save me. That is a very powerful feeling, and that may be the only way to overcome some of our deep-rooted vasanas. I'm trying to find the next question. Here it is. The person wanted to know how they can get the past videos. So we'll be sending. We already did, or we will be sending those links to the person. You can request them to the same address as the question address, email address. And then there was a question from the same person regarding a couple classes ago. The person says, you spoke about matter versus the seer and how inert matter does not see. If I interpreted you correctly, which is, not sure, how would this square with Amma's quote saying, we must remember that everything is sentient. Everything is full of consciousness and life. Everything exists in God. There's no thing as mere matter. Consciousness alone exists. So this person is confused, saying, isn't Amma implying that inert matter sees, is sentient? Okay, very good question. There's two ways to respond to that. One is that because Amma is an avatar, she knows and feels a lot more than any of us, including me. And so maybe Amma is sensing something in everything, the sentience that we cannot see. What we call sentience is simply what we can perceive and measure somehow. Not necessarily scientifically, maybe feeling it at least. But the Amma quote that you provided, or this person provided, could be referring to something beyond human comprehension. In which case, she might be just perceiving something that we don't know and we cannot understand, but we just take her word for it and say Amma's right. the other way we could interpret it would be the following. When I was using that word, inert matter, it was an attempt to use everyday English to explain a Sanskrit spiritual concept called the kshetra, which we've been using many times, which is anatma, which is prakriti, it is maya. And the idea is that matter is always inert and has no sentience. So matter will always be matter, and consciousness will always be consciousness, like we said. So there's never going to be any confusion between that, because that is the basic principle of Vedanta. And Amma her teaching is Vedanta. So she won't go against that, guaranteed. And sentience, it basically refers to something we humans can identify to be a sign of consciousness. So, if there's a kind of consciousness that we cannot perceive, that is something else. Amma only can see that, right? But that is not the full extent of consciousness. What we can see is not the full extent of consciousness. It is only what we can perceive. So I'll use my example of Fred again. I'm coming to like that example of Fred. When Fred is walking around, it makes us think that his body is conscious, while the reality is that consciousness, or the kshetrajna, is being reflected by Fred's subtle body. We've said this many times, which happens to be temporarily associated with a particular body. That consciousness happens to be associated. We associate it because of the reflection. The only reason why Fred's body doesn't start turning into mud before our eyes is because that the consciousness is being reflected within it. And after that subtle body departs, we can see the reality that the physical body was always inert matter, because it starts to decompose. Nothing actually changes about Fred's body. It was always inert and always will be inert. Consciousness is the source of the sentience we were seeing in that body, seeing through that body. And that consciousness hasn't changed either. The only difference is on the empirical plane, the experiential plane, because we can no longer perceive that consciousness, because our sense organs cannot access that plane where the subtle body continues to exist. It's just like water becoming vapor. We can only see water. And the same H2O molecules can be detected in the air, maybe by a machine. You have these humidistats and everything. They'll say this much water content, humidity in the air. We can't see it. We can feel it a little bit, but it's not as tangible as water. So like that, the consciousness is still there. We just can't see it. So we would say that this is not conscious. But from Amma's perspective, she sees everything. She feels everything. So in that sense, she can say everything is consciousness. But she doesn't mean that this thing is alive, right? The matter is always matter. It's not going to become conscious. It may be associated temporarily with sentience or consciousness, or the reflection of consciousness, if it has a subtle body. That's all I can say. Otherwise, Amma has to answer the question because it was her words that led to the question in the first place. So that's the questions for today. I don't believe we have any more. One moment. Let's see if a new one came in after I checked them yesterday. Yeah, these were just written today. I will answer them. There's a couple from today. I'll answer them next week, because we're now exactly on time if we end. So thank you for sending your questions, and we will carry on the class and the questions next week. For now, we will conclude with Asatoma and Loka Samasta, followed by a brief meditation. If people decide to join us, you're welcome to. Otherwise, this is the end of the actual class. Take a deep breath. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Jyotirma Amritam Mrityo. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Om Amriteshwari Namaha. Let us take a few moments to meditate together. Close your eyes. Slow down the breathing process. And feel the body and mind relaxing further and further with each and every deep inhalation and exhalation. Try to feel a subtle spiritual energy, Amma's subtle presence all around you, as though you were in her embrace right now. Feel her illuminating you with her presence, that pure consciousness. Continue to breathe with full awareness, being fully conscious of each and every breath. Now, as we have been doing in the weeks past, let us try to assimilate the teachings of this chapter. Visualize your own body as though it were separate from you. You can either look at the body as though you were looking at your body in a mirror, or you can be aware of each part of the body, starting with the feet, going all the way up one by one to the head, and from there visualize the entire body as being separate from you. Try to visualize the body as separate from you for a while. If your awareness goes to a sensation in the body, simply watch that. If a thought diverts your awareness, again, just watch that thought. Remain the witness throughout. As you witness the body, remember that it is our kshetram, the pot, so to speak, where we think the consciousness is situated. In reality, that consciousness is all pervasive. There's only one. And we are all witnessing with that consciousness principle. To see the body as the apparent pot that supposedly holds the consciousness, but only in an illusory way. So as you're witnessing the body, you can dissolve that form completely into light. And think of yourself as that all-pervasive light of consciousness. As we chant the closing mantra, remember the meaning, which is perfect for this chapter. That is full, this is full. From the fullness, everything arises. Taking away the fullness, from the fullness, it still remains complete. The pure consciousness is there, it is here, it is everywhere. If you take that pure consciousness from the pure consciousness, it remains pure consciousness all the same. That fullness, that completeness is the Brahman or the Atman, our own true self. So as we chant this mantra, let us remember that meaning and feel it deep within. Take a deep breath. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnad Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadhaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. One more long, deep breath. And as you exhale, you can slowly open your eyes. Namah Shivaya. Thank you again for joining us. This Saturday, day after tomorrow, the live bhajans will be from here in Chicago. We also have a special occasion this month, which is the 9th anniversary of the Chicago Ashram. And we will be celebrating that. I will be giving a short talk in celebration of the occasion, and we will also sing bhajans here with hearts full of gratitude to our beloved Amma. So please join us day after tomorrow and also for the next Gita class on Thursday. Namaskar.